Hi, Paul Arnold here, sometimes known as Stuttering Professor, and today I want to talk to you about a subject that I'm really passionate about, and that's storytelling. And in particular, storytelling inside organisations. Because storytelling is much, much bigger than just the films we go and see at the cinema or the stories that were read to us as kids. Actually, it pervades all of our lives, and I love the phrase written by Christiana Baldwin in Storycatcher, who talks about we live in story like a fish lives in water, because it surrounds us in everything we do. You know, stories influence change in organisations. They drive culture, they form brands, and they can influence the most hardened of rational business people. You know, and I would suggest that it's one of those powerful tools that you can go and develop in your business life. So actually, I want to really cover this in sort of two blocks. I want to talk about why is storytelling so powerful, and then I want to help you structure a story. And actually, in terms of presentation skills, I've done another video all about that. So we're just going to cover those two things about, first, why is storytelling so powerful? And secondly, about how do you structure a story? The first thing is, you know what? It's been around since the beginning of time, since we first started to go and talk. It was our way that we communicate and the way we shared things with each other. So when the elders got around the fire, they talked about where the good food was and where the dangers lay. And when they shared stuff in stories to pass on to their kids, so therefore when they grew up, they actually were to be successful. And a lot of work has been done about the fact that it's genetic within us, it's innate. You know, a lot of work has shown that basically, kids from as young as 2 can decipher a story and can tell a story. And another piece of work has been shown that about 60% of all the knowledge we store inside of us is stored in story. So actually, it really is the fundamental way that we are using it to make sense, and we're using it to remember things. Which really leads me on to the next thing about stories shape meaning. And and we are fundamentally meaning-making machines, and we're trying to make sense of the world we live in, because out of making sense of it, we have some degree of control over our lives. And that may be a myth in its own right. But actually, stories hold meaning. They help us make sense of the world in which we live. And I think even right now, with the increasingly complex world we're living in, we need stories more than ever. And actually, you think about it, stories, have really helped us to make sense of events that are taking place. So go back thousands of years ago when the land dried up, there was no rain. They said, well, we've clearly angered the gods and we must take action to appease the gods. So we lived in a narrative of religion. And now we have another narrative, which is a narrative of science. And I'm not trying to decry anyone's religious beliefs, but just trying to recognize the power of those spaces to help us make sense of the world. And stories travel. Stories, they're deeply contagious. Why? Because they're easy to remember and they're easy, therefore, to retell. And to go back to religion again, every religion spread far and wide, well before social media and TV. They spread through the power of story, through parables that got shared and echoed out into society. And I'd say stories actually, they cut through and they cut under. Because actually what happens is that we all love to hear a story. We just sort of relax back and say, tell us a story. It's the most powerful way we want to hear. And actually what it also does is, because we let the story in, it sort of communicates with our system 1 brain, our sort of emotional side. And you know what? It sort of goes under the wire of the critical, rational thinking side of it. And consequently, stories influence. And stories seduce us. And they're a much softer way of influencing, in a very respectful and a subtle way. And they often allow the unsayable to be said, and they help overcome resistance. They help us present new ideas, thoughts, perspectives that otherwise may not be allowed to be listened to. And stories can help us change attitudes and change beliefs. And the reality is that a lot of work's been shown that facts don't change people. Actually, facts just lock people into where they are, and actually things like stories are much more powerful at making people see a reframe and change things. You know, and that's because stories infiltrate at that subconscious level, and they work at the emotional level, and they allow us to see things in a slightly different way. And inside organizations, stories create leadership. Because there are two ways it creates leadership. One is the story I tell about who I am, which therefore allows you to connect with me as a human being and think I can be trusted, I can be respected. But also, you think about what a leader is. A leader is only the person who is leading people to a destination they want to go to. And that fundamentally is the story, the mission, the purpose that the leader is telling a story, the story of a better world that they're going to help take people to. Now, we always say that the leader is the chief storyteller of the organization, and they've got to keep telling the same story, keep telling the same story, keep telling the same story. And the last thing within organizations I want to talk about is stories basically create value. You know, there's a wonderful sort of example of this about how a set of old golf clubs, not even a complete set, was sold at auction for $900,000. Frankly, it's not worth $9. And it sold for that price because of who owned it. They were JFK's golf clubs. And we find that all the time with brands. Brands are just this functional center. But surrounding it is the story that makes it has the emotional factor that we really connected. And we're prepared to pay massively more. And I always say the bigger the story, the bigger the value. And I've done a lot of work upon how do we take this principle of storytelling to the very heart of how we define a brand. You know, and it's rather than using the brand pyramid or whatever, I decide about the brand story. What's the meta story this brand is trying to tell, and what are the sub stories that we need to tell to help sort of reinforce what is the core about that. And I talk about 8 different sources of story that we can help to support the brand, but that's something that you have to speak to me about outside of this, because I don't have time to cover that. So now let's talk about how do you structure a story. And again, I want to keep it really simple, and we need to have an arc of a story. And I talk about we've got to have conflict, we've got to have action, we've got to have resolution. That sits at the core of it. And basically all that is often about a person. You think about a film, you go to film, you get engaged with a character, and then you're hooked by that character, and then something happens, there's a conflict, and then we're really interested in staying in that story because you want to see what action do they take that will be resolved. You know, Robert McKee in his great book Story talks a lot about how we don't go to the cinema to escape reality, we go to the cinema to discover reality. This idea, we follow that because we want to see how did they solve that problem. Because very often why it's so engaging is because through your story I get to understand my own story. So therefore we've got to create conflict, have an action and a resolution. And all those ultimately lead down to the morality. What is that really saying? Is it saying a message about failure is a key element of success, or you have to risk all to get what you really want, or you've got to keep persevering and pushing on through? And in many ways, this comes to how we therefore define what is the story we want to tell. Because we've got to start from the moral and move out. What is the issue we're trying to land with someone? You know, are we trying to land a place of curiosity? Are we trying to land a place of breaking through fear? And what we then do, we find a story, and ideally a personal story, because that really is engaging, because we therefore go back to the character, we engage with that character, and we therefore go into the conflict. And if you say, I was this person, I had that conflict, I dealt with that, that was how I pushed through, you know, and dealt with the constant failures that one has. And then I think once you've done that, you then reduce it and you reduce it and you reduce it. You boil it down until you've really got the core elements. You practice it, because let's be quite frank, in organizations do not have much time for theatre. I know they do a bit, but like you can't be telling a story over 90 minutes. You've probably got 3 minutes. So how do you reduce it down to get to the core of what you're really trying to go and say? So I hope that is of use. And, by all means, contact me afterwards. I do lots of work in the field of storytelling in organisations, either about how to define what is the story behind your brand, or on the other hand, helping you to tell to tell stories better. And I want to just leave you with one last thought. What is the story you're currently living? Often given to you by your parents, by your society, by your organisation. And what is the story you want to live for the rest of your life?